gone.
And in what today would likely be a post-credit scene, the movie would end with a shot of a phoenix-like shape soaring through the water, clearly setting up the plot to the sequel and teasing an adaptation.
Man, I remember watching that. I don't know how many of you guys remember watching X2 in the theaters, but seeing the tease for the Phoenix at the end, whoo, got me pretty hyped.
Of the Dark Phoenix saga, one of the greatest comic book stories of all time. And while X2 may seem somewhat small scale by today's standards, at the time, the film was considered one of the best comic book films to date, as audiences eagerly anticipated its sequel.
I think it's still considered one of the best. I put it, it's got to be top 10. It could be top 5. Top 5's really hard these days, but X2 is goated, man. I mean, come on. You agree, right?
Originally, we'd never get it. Or rather, we'd never get the one we deserved, as director Bryan Singer, who had directed the previous 2 films, left to direct Superman Returns instead of staying to finish his X-Men trilogy. And it's a real shame, too, because not only was X3 a major disappointment, but so was Superman Returns. And in the years since, it's left many fans wondering what could have been Bryan Singer's X-Men 3. So let's dive in and find out. Singer's X3 would have opened where the last film ended, at Alkali Lake. Except this time, it's completely barren and dried up. There are also reports of strange phenomena going on around the world, each time accompanied by bright lights in the sky.
There's a bunch of concept work for this that was set up before he left. So this is all like real, just so you know.
For example, mutant prisons are suddenly decimated by a mysterious force, while cargo ships shuttling mutants across the Atlantic for slave labor get torn apart. Eventually, we learn that the cause of all of this is the Phoenix, who has returned as a godlike force as she takes things into her own hands, causing disruptions around the world. Sick of all the fighting and viewing herself as above everyone else, her goal would have been to end the conflict between humans, the X-Men, and the Brotherhood on her own terms once and for all. However, she also would have been overcome by how much power she could wield, and Magneto, much like in the version of the film we got, would have looked to use this to his advantage. But in Singer's version, Magneto would have used Emma Frost, reimagined here as an empath able to control people's emotions, to manipulate an unstable Jean Grey so that Magneto could control her and use her as a weapon. I
mean, I kind of like that. It's a little weird that she's empath and not telepathic, but I mean, I like Emma Frost. That would have been kind of dope to see.
To the drama, Frost also would have been an old flame of Xavier, and the number one choice to play her was Sigourney Weaver. Cyclops also wouldn't have been abruptly killed off in this version either. Remember, the only reason they killed him off was because the actor that played him, James Marsden, had joined Singer on Superman Returns, where he—
What? I didn't know that. That's why they killed Cyclops off? It's one of the worst parts of the whole movie, dude. What the hell? That's crazy.
Played Lois Lane's fiance. And this decision to kill him off was apparently the studio's, and it was based on Marsden's lack of availability due to filming the other movie. Although part of me wonders if some of it may have been petty spite.
Oh yeah, you don't. As somebody who, let me just chime in here, Chad. As somebody who's very petty and an expert in, that is absolutely what it is. That's absolutely what it was. Petty. Takes one to know one.
Originally, the studio suggested just killing Cyclops off screen with a dialogue reference to his demise.
Oh my God.
Tell me what happened to him.
But the eventual writers of the film insisted that Jean Grey kill him on screen instead. In Singer's version, we'd finally get to see Cyclops evolve into the leader we all know and love.
We're with you, Psych.
Consumed by guilt, Cyclops blamed the
awesome.
X-Men's perceived weaknesses for Jean's untimely death. Driven by the desperate desire to prevent such tragedies from happening in the future, and firmly believing that had the X-Men been stronger, faster, and better fighters, Jean may have survived, Cyclops builds the Danger Room, a training facility designed to improve the X-Men's abilities.
Dude,
and this
that would have been cool. So we went from a movie where Cyclops was going to get justice to killing him, and they would have done it off screen. That's crazy.
Obsession with making the X-Men an elite team would have been his arc for the film, as he struggles to let go of Jean and the guilt he feels for her death and transformation into the Phoenix. Eventually, it would be Cyclops, not Wolverine, who kills her, although it would only be her body that Cyclops destroys with his optic blast. Her spirit would live on, evolving Jean past mutant and into a godlike state similar to the Star Child in 2001: A Space space odyssey,
Sounds dope.
ultimately becoming the cosmic force that the Phoenix is known to be. The
Hell
film
yeah.
would end with her leaving Earth as a higher level of intelligence as she journeys into the cosmos, possibly to kickstart life somewhere else.
Wow.
The final scene of the film would have been her telling Cyclops and the rest of the X-Men that she'll be watching. The other storyline from X3 that we all remember was adapted from the Gifted story in the comics that featured a mutant cure. The idea to use this story in the film came from a studio executive who had read Joss Whedon's Gifted run with the mutant cure in it and thought that would make an interesting quandary for the characters.
Sure.
So if Singer stuck around to direct, it's likely that he would have been forced to shoehorn the cure storyline into the film too, as the writers of X3 had to fight the studio tooth and nail to even include the Phoenix plot, since the studio only wanted the film to be about the mutant cure, feeling it gave a reason for Magneto's conflict with the X-Men. And this is why the end result is a half-baked adaptation of the Dark Phoenix saga, with Jean Grey not given much to do in the film's second half, as the studio considered the tone of the Phoenix storyline too dark for a mainstream summer movie, and that its appeal would be limited to hardcore fans rather than general audiences. Screenwriter Michael Dougherty, who left with Singer to work on Superman Returns, commented on the Cure storyline, saying had he stayed to write the film, Rogue never would have taken it. He'd go on to explain that the whole point of Rogue's character arc was that she was supposed to come to terms with who she was. But by having her take the cure, you're effectively telling girls they should change who they are to get a guy.
I hope you're not doing this for some boy.
Which was not only the wrong message to send, but it went against her character's journey too. Speaking of changes, Xavier also likely would not have been killed in Singer's version.
Wow, so much better. Dude, first of all, how many of y'all watched this when it was out in theaters? I had a really unique experience with this movie where it was like one of the first times I walked out of a movie. A lot of people were praising it at the time, and the movie made good money. But I remember walking out of the movie and being like super disappointed. A lot of my friends liked it. I was just like, nah, bro. Like, a lot of stuff bothered me. The thing that bothered me maybe the most was Magneto, like, using the mutants, letting them, like, get cured. Like, that whole, like, in chess, the pawns go first kind of thing. Like, that just really doesn't feel like Magneto to me. Phoenix killing off Scott. Like, there's just a lot of stuff I was like, ugh, I just really didn't like it. But at the time, I wasn't so into the movie process that I really knew what was going on behind the scenes. So I just was like, what happened, you know?
Which was another studio mandate, as they felt the script that was written after Singer left called for a dramatic turning point midway through the film. So what happened? Why did Singer decide to forego finishing his X-Men trilogy in favor of directing Superman Returns? Singer even said, I like finishing things. I know X-Men 3 was quite rushed and I didn't complete it, and I felt a little like it was probably my responsibility to do that as a filmmaker, and I didn't. There's the first clue that X3 was rushed, and we'll get to why in a moment. But first, Singer would go on to drop more clues and say, I had a very strong vision for the next X-Men picture, but Superman has always been a dream of mine. Things weren't moving as quickly and it was difficult. I love those actors and I have a strong relationship with the X-Men universe. But I've had an idea for a Superman movie for many years, so for me, the fact that it was available and Warner Brothers was willing to take everything it had spent 11 years developing with 3 other directors and throw it completely out and let me start from scratch at an accelerated level of time. Once they showed the willingness, the desire, and excitement to do that after my pitch, it became an obvious choice for me, but a difficult one. There's a lot to unpack here, and while it's easy to point the finger at Singer for not returning, I hope by now you've all come to learn from watching my videos that a lot of the blame for projects being canceled or ruined comes from the people whose names you might never even see on screen.
It is crazy though, because we see them now, and this is really interesting. I don't know who this first
hope by
guy
now
is. Who is this guy?
You've all come to learn from
Brothers
watching
people,
my videos that a lot of the blame for
But that's A.V. Arad, right?
projects being canceled or ruined comes from the people
And that's Tom Rothman. Those are the 2 last people are the people that are still fucking shit up over at Sony.
whose names you might never even see on screen, like those running the studio. So you want to know why Singer left to do Superman Returns? Because after X2, Fox took over a year to negotiate his deal to direct X3, which is what Singer meant when he said things weren't moving so quickly. After Fox strung him along and tried to lowball him, Warner Brothers swept in and took full advantage of Singer's love of Superman, offering him the director's chair and free reign to do whatever he wanted. So why didn't Fox just wait until Singer finished directing Superman Returns returns to bring him back for X3? The answer is simple: petty jealousy. That's what
Petty
Singer meant when he
jealousy.
said X3 was rushed. Fox wanted to rush it out to try and compete with Superman Returns.
Wow.
Or rather, compete with Bryan Singer. And speaking of stupid studio decisions, after Singer left with his writing team, Fox hired not one, but two writers to each write two separate drafts for X3 simultaneously, with the intent of then bringing in a third writer to combine these drafts into a sort of Frankenstein monster that would take
What the fuck? That could not actually be a strategy. Holy shit.
best elements of each script. Obviously, this approach isn't the best way to write a screenplay, which is why X3 writer Simon Kinberg, upon discovering that Zach Penn was the other writer, reached out to him and proposed that they collaborate on one version of the script instead of competing against each other. Matthew Vaughn, who at the time was fresh off of directing Layer Cake, was hired as Singer's replacement. He'd immediately joined the writing team as all three men would work closely to develop the story. As the movie hurtled towards production, Vaughn ended up dropping out a few weeks before they were to start filming. Wow. And while at the time he cited personal and family reasons for his departure, in the years since he has admitted that the real reason was that he didn't have time to make the movie he wanted to make, stating, "I had a vision for how it should be, and I wanted to make sure I was making a film as good as X-Men 2, and I knew there was no way it could be. It was a tough decision because it was a hell of an opportunity, but I was trying to make a career as a director, and I didn't want to be the guy accused of making a bad X-Men movie." Vaughn would eventually return to direct an X-Men movie with First Class, which would have production problems of its own. Stepping in at the 11th hour to replace him on X3, however, would be Brett Ratner, most famous for directing the Rush Hour movie.
I put out in the universe that I wanted to do a superhero movie, a comic book movie, because that's why I was doing Superman. And when that didn't happen, I thought, oh, I'm not going to get another opportunity. Brian's got X-Men, Sam Raimi's got Spider-Man, and Chris Nolan's got the Batman series. And then when Brian left to go do Superman, I said, oh my God, there's an opening. Got it!
Unfortunately, Ratner had a limited knowledge of the X-Men universe and had to rely heavily on his writers for guidance. And while Bryan Singer was friendly and supportive of Ratner in X3, as there was a fair amount of crossover between crews on X3 and Superman Returns,
when I came onto the movie, I called Brian, he's a friend of mine, and I said, oh, I'm gonna do X-Men. I know you probably want Stanley Cooper to do it, but he's not available, and I'm gonna come in and do it. And he said, you know, he gave me some advice. He said, whatever you do, don't read the internet. I'm like, why? What are you talking about? He goes, because they wrote all the same bad stuff about me on the first X-Men. And I avoided it. He said, I can't wait to see your version of this movie.
Vaughn, on the other hand, was not impressed by
avoid the
finished
internet.
product, saying that he could have made something 100 times better than what we got from Ratner. He'd go on to say that his version of X3 would have been 40 minutes longer to let the emotions of the characters and heart of the story come through, accusing Ratner of not letting the drama play out and making it a quick 90 minutes of wall-to-wall noise and action with no room to breathe.
Sure.
He felt both Professor X's and Jean Grey's death scenes were executed poorly and didn't capture the emotional weight those deaths deserve.
Agreed.
Fans may have also noticed that Nightcrawler, who was introduced in X2, was completely absent from X3.
Yeah, what's up with that?
And while he originally was in an early draft of the X3 script, it was such a small part that the studio felt it wasn't worth it to go through the long and costly makeup process to transform Alan Cumming into the character. Simon Kinberg, writer of X3, would go on to say, Singer did such an excellent job with Nightcrawler in X2 in both terms of representing his powers and giving him an emotional arc that there wasn't much left to do with the character in X3. It also felt like he might tread a little bit on the terrain of Beast in terms of similarities in the characters and their political standpoints. So we ended up jettisoning the character. And while Kinberg and his writing partner Zach Penn tried to figure out what new mutants to introduce in X3, they soon realized they would have to fight over characters with the makers of the prequel film X-Men Origins Wolverine, which was being developed at the same time, and any mutants appearing in both may pose continuity issues. Although it's not like the X-Men films are known for their strict adherence to continuity.
True.
Hey, it's me. Don't scratch. Cleaning up the timelines.
Probably the most famous X-Men character that fans have been longing to see on the big
Gambit.
screen is Gambit, who is considered for both the convoy scene to be freed by Magneto and the Battle of Alcatraz to fight alongside the X-Men.
That would've been
Ultimately, however, the writers felt it was better to save Gambit for a future film where they could do the character justice, rather than just throw him in for a quick cameo, which the makers of X-Men Origins Wolverine were all too happy to do. It's also worth noting that X3 is the first film that saw digital de-aging used on actors.
That's
or rather,
wild.
the first film to publicly disclose it.
It's the first comic book movie to have a post-credit scene, too, I believe, actually.
as the technology was previously used exclusively for vanity retouching to make actors look younger and more attractive, which understandably was kept very hush-hush. Here, it was used to make Professor X and Magneto look 2 decades younger in a flashback prologue. And while at the time I remember this looking incredible, taking a look at it now, it's clear the technology has come a long way, as its use in X3, for lack of a better phrase, hasn't aged well. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. Interestingly though, Patrick Stewart said playing a younger version of himself was an acting challenge, as he also had to take into consideration how his younger self moved, explaining that as you age, your body becomes less fluid and it moves differently.
I can definitely confirm that, guys. Just so you know, as you get older, your body's less fluid. 100%.
I couldn't help but think of Martin Scorsese's The Irishman and wish they had consulted Stewart before making that film, as the de-aging technique they employed became famous for all the wrong reasons. De Niro's face may have appeared younger, but he still had the body of a 70-year-old man with osteoarthritis. After the critical failure of X3, the franchise would be revived with X-Men First Class, directed by returning Matthew Vaughn.
Yeah.
This would be followed by the triumphant return of Bryan Singer, who would direct Days of Future Past and use the film's time travel element to go back and change history.
I actually like both of those movies. I think those are two of the strongest ones. First Class and Days of Future Past. Very cool.
Retconning the events of X3, although the end result would be a confusing mess of continuity issues. Singer would return one last time to direct the lackluster Apocalypse, but after allegations of sexual abuse, he would be replaced by writer Simon Kinberg, who saw an opportunity to make up for X3 by taking another shot at adapting the Dark Phoenix saga.
In changing the timeline in Days of Future Past, part of the reason I did that was I wanted a chance to tell the Dark Phoenix story.
And fuck it up again?
In a more fulsome way, where it's really like the full Dark Phoenix story and it focuses on Jean's story.
Unfortunately, the end result would be a critical and commercial failure, and ultimately the nail in the coffin for this iteration of the X-Men franchise.
Yeah.
And by the way, the women are always saving the men around here. You might want to think about changing the name to X-Women.
Yeah, good luck with that.
With Disney's
Good luck with that.
acquisition of Fox, Marvel is set to reboot the franchise yet again. Although at this point, it's unknown whether they'll bring back any of the current actors or opt for a fresh start with a complete recast. Thanks for watching, everybody, and don't forget to like and subscribe.
Yeah, that was good. That was good. What do you guys think? Pretty cool, huh? I think that guy makes good videos.